Welcome to this special double extra large edition of Bedtime Finance Stories. In this video, we will revisit some of the biggest financial scandals in history, stories of greed, deception, and collapse. From Ponzi and Madoff to Enron, Lehman Brothers, and the LIBOR scandal, each chapter reveals how fragile trust in money and markets can be, all told in a calm and gentle way, designed to help you relax, unwind, and maybe even fall asleep while listening. So, find a comfortable place, close your eyes, and let's begin our journey through the scandals that shaped the world of finance. Hello, and welcome. My name is Philly. I've always been fascinated by history and by the mysteries of the financial world. Tonight, I invite you to join me on a journey through one of the most remarkable financial scandals in history. These are stories of ambition, deception, and downfall. But don't worry, you don't need to stay awake until the end. You can simply let the words guide you into sleep while I tell you the tale of Charles Ponzi, the man who gave his name to the famous Ponzi scheme. It was the year 1920. The city of Boston was alive with excitement. Streetcars rattled along cobblestone streets. Shop windows glowed warmly in the evening light, and people hurried past with newspapers tucked under their arms. But in one part of the city, something unusual was happening. Crowds of men and women gathered in front of an office building on School Street. They weren't there for a concert or a show. They were there for money. Inside the building sat a short, charismatic man with dark hair, sharp eyes, and a charming smile. His name was Charles Ponzi, an Italian immigrant who had once arrived in America with little more than hope in his pockets. Yet now, people believed he held the key to wealth and prosperity. Ponzi promised something extraordinary. He claimed he had discovered a way to earn unbelievable profits from a very simple idea: trading international postal reply coupons. At the time, these coupons were used to prepay postage for letters sent abroad. Ponzi explained that by buying them cheaply in one country and redeeming them at a higher value in another, he could make enormous returns. It sounded clever, technical, and most importantly, completely legal. He promised investors that their money would double in just 90 days. Not a year, not 5 years, but only 3 months. In a world where banks paid tiny interest, this seemed almost magical. Word spread quickly. First, a few friends and acquaintances gave him their savings. They were paid back promptly with the promised profit. Delighted, they told others. Soon, shopkeepers, widows, teachers, and businessmen lined up to invest. Even wealthy individuals began handing over vast sums. The truth, however, was very different. Ponzi was not making fortunes with postal coupons. In fact, the idea was practically impossible on a large scale. The coupons existed, yes, but the logistics of buying, transporting, and redeeming them in massive quantities made the plan unworkable. So, how did Ponzi pay his investors? Quite simply, with the money of new investors. The early participants received generous payouts, which created excitement and trust. But those payouts were not profits. They were simply the deposits of the next wave of hopeful customers. This cycle, using new money to pay old promises, is now what we call a Ponzi scheme. And at the time, no one understood it better than Charles Ponzi himself. By the summer of 1920, Ponzi was a celebrity in Boston. Newspapers ran stories about him. He wore fine suits, smoked expensive cigars, and smiled for photographers. Ordinary people believed he had unlocked a secret formula for endless wealth. Some even compared him to financial geniuses of the age. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Investigators began to ask questions. Could postal coupons really explain the millions flowing through Ponzi's office? Why were so many people investing, yet so few coupons actually being traded? Journalists dug deeper, and authorities became suspicious. In August of 1920, the scheme finally collapsed. When auditors examined Ponzi's accounts, they discovered that his debts were enormous. Tens of millions of dollars, far more than he could ever repay. The empire of wealth was nothing but air. Panic spread quickly. The crowds that had once cheered for him now demanded their money back. Banks, courts, and police swirled into action. Ponzi was arrested and charged with fraud. In the end, thousands of people lost their life savings. The damage was estimated at around $15 million at the time, a staggering sum equal to hundreds of millions today. Charles Ponzi spent years in prison. Later, he was deported back to Italy, where he lived the rest of his life in obscurity and poverty. His name, however, lived on, forever tied to schemes that promise the impossible and deliver nothing. And so, the tale of Charles Ponzi is more than just a story of crime. It is a reminder of how easily hope and greed can blind us, how even intelligent people can be swept away by promises of quick riches, and how fragile trust can be when it is built on deception. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let this story settle gently in your mind. May it remind you that not everything that shines is gold, and that sometimes the brightest promises hide only shadows. Good night. Hello again, and welcome back. My name is Philly, and this is our quiet little corner where we explore the greatest financial scandals in history. I've always been fascinated by the way money, ambition, and human nature intertwine, and how sometimes that combination leads to shocking stories. This channel is not about stressing over details or keeping track of dates. It's about relaxing, listening, and maybe drifting off to sleep while I guide you through tales of greed, deception, and downfall. So, settle in. Find a comfortable position, let your eyes grow heavy, and let's travel to Houston, Texas at the turn of the 21st century, where one of the largest corporations in America, Enron, was about to collapse in spectacular fashion. Enron was founded in 1985 after a merger between two natural gas companies, Houston Natural Gas and Internorth. At first, it was just another energy company, transporting natural gas through pipelines. But in the 1990s, under the leadership of CEO Kenneth Lay, Enron transformed itself. Lay and his team envisioned Enron not just as an energy company, but as a trading powerhouse. They wanted to turn electricity and natural gas into commodities, like stocks or bonds, that could be bought and sold in complex markets. This vision was bold, and in many ways ahead of its time. As energy markets were deregulated in the United States, Enron positioned itself as a middleman between producers and consumers. On paper, the company looked unstoppable. By the late 1990s, Enron was one of the most admired companies in America. It was praised for its innovation, its ambitious culture, and its seemingly endless growth. Magazines ranked it among the best places to work. Investors flocked to it, and employees, thousands of them, believed they were part of something revolutionary. But behind the glossy exterior, Enron's culture was deeply flawed. Executives pushed for constant growth and high stock prices. Employees were encouraged to take huge risks, and failure was punished harshly. The company even had a system known as rank and yank, where employees were regularly evaluated and the lowest performers were fired. This created a cutthroat environment where the pressure to succeed at all costs led people to bend rules or break them entirely. For Enron's leaders, especially Kenneth Lay, Jeffrey Skilling, and Andrew Fastow, appearances were everything. As long as the company's stock price rose, almost any tactic seemed justified. Enron's greatest trick was how it reported its finances. Under Skilling, who became CEO in 2001, the company adopted a method called mark-to-market accounting. Normally, a company records profits and losses as they actually happen, when money is earned or spent. But mark-to-market allowed Enron to record potential future profits immediately, even if the money hadn't actually been made. Here's an example. Imagine Enron signed a 10-year contract to supply energy. Even if no energy had been delivered yet, Enron could estimate the total profit over 10 years and count it as income right away. This made the company's earnings look huge, even though the cash wasn't there. At the same time, Enron used hundreds of off-the-books entities, special purpose vehicles, or SPVs, created by Chief Financial Officer Andrew Fastow. These shell companies were used to hide Enron's debts and losses, keeping them away from the balance sheet. It was a financial shell game. To outsiders, Enron looked profitable, but inside, debts piled up, and the company was far weaker than it appeared. By the year 2000, Enron stock had reached an all-time high of around $90 per share. It was one of the largest companies in America, valued at more than $60 billion. But the cracks were already forming. Analysts and journalists began asking questions about how Enron really made money. Some employees quietly expressed doubts. Still, the illusion held for a while. Executives reassured investors. Skilling, Lay, and Fastow projected confidence. They claimed Enron was a new kind of company, too advanced to be understood by outsiders. But confidence can only last so long. In 2001, a series of revelations began to unravel the truth. In August 2001, Jeffrey Skilling abruptly resigned as CEO, citing personal reasons. His departure raised eyebrows, but the real storm was just beginning. That fall, journalists from the Wall Street Journal and analysts from various firms started exposing Enron's questionable accounting practices. By October, Enron admitted it had overstated its earnings by nearly $600 million. Soon after, it revealed the existence of Fastow's off-the-books entities and billions of dollars in hidden debt. Confidence collapsed almost overnight. Enron's stock price, once soaring near $90, plummeted to less than $1 by the end of November 2001. In December, Enron filed for bankruptcy, the largest in U.S. history at the time. The collapse of Enron wasn't just a corporate story. It was deeply personal for thousands of people. Employees who had invested their retirement savings in Enron stock saw their life savings vanish. Ordinary investors lost billions, and the public's trust in corporations and auditors was shaken. Arthur Andersen, one of the world's largest accounting firms, was implicated in the scandal for shredding documents and failing to properly audit Enron's books. The firm collapsed soon after, putting tens of thousands of people out of work. The Enron scandal became a symbol of corporate greed, deception, and the dangers of unchecked ambition. In the years that followed, Enron's top executives faced justice. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted of fraud and insider trading. Andrew Fastow, the architect of the off-the-books schemes, served time in prison. Kenneth Lay, Enron's founder, was also convicted, but he passed away before his sentencing. The scandal led to sweeping reforms in corporate governance. In 2002, the U.S. Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which imposed stricter regulations on financial reporting and increased penalties for fraud. The goal was to restore trust in the financial system and to prevent another Enron from happening. The story of Enron is more than just the fall of a company. It's a reminder of how ambition, when unchecked by ethics, can spiral into disaster. It shows how the pressure to succeed, to always appear strong, can lead people down dangerous paths. As we close tonight's story, remember that even the most powerful corporations are fragile if built on deception. Enron once seemed unstoppable, but in the end, it collapsed under the weight of its own lies. So now, as you drift into sleep, let this story be a gentle reminder. True strength lies not in appearances, but in honesty and integrity. Thank you for listening and for spending this quiet time with me. My name is Philly, and I'll be back with another story soon. Until then, sleep well, and good night. Hello and welcome back. My name is Philly, and on this channel, I guide you gently through the greatest financial scandals in history. I've always been fascinated by the way money, ambition, and human nature weave together, and sometimes create stories that are almost too unbelievable to be true. This is a space for calm storytelling. You don't need to remember every detail or follow every number. All you have to do is relax, get comfortable, and let my voice carry you into the world of financial history, perhaps even into sleep. Tonight's story takes us to Germany, to one of the most extraordinary corporate scandals of recent years. This is the tale of Wirecard, the company that promised to be the future of digital payments, only to collapse in 2020, leaving behind billions in losses and one of the biggest financial shocks Europe has ever seen. Wirecard was founded in 1999, during the first big wave of the internet. Back then, it was a small company in a suburb of Munich, focusing on processing payments for online transactions. At first, it was nothing glamorous. Its main clients included businesses considered too risky for traditional banks, such as online gambling or adult entertainment sites. But Wirecard quickly reinvented itself. By the early 2000s, it positioned itself as a serious financial technology company, a pioneer of what we now call fintech. It acquired licenses, offered prepaid credit cards, and began expanding internationally. At a time when the internet was still young, Wirecard seemed to be riding the wave of the future. As the years went by, Wirecard grew rapidly. By 2005, Markus Braun, an Austrian computer scientist, became CEO. He was charismatic, visionary, and full of confidence. Under his leadership, Wirecard transformed its public image, from a small payment processor into a global player. Braun spoke of a world where cash would disappear and digital transactions would dominate. Investors loved this vision. Wirecard's shares rose steadily, and the company acquired other firms across Europe and Asia. By 2018, Wirecard had achieved something remarkable. It replaced Commerzbank in Germany's prestigious stock index, the DAX 30. For many, This was proof that Wirecard had become one of Germany's corporate champions, standing shoulder to shoulder with giants like Siemens, Volkswagen, and Deutsche Bank. Politicians praised the company. Investors around the world admired it. And for Germany, Wirecard became a symbol that it too could produce modern tech giants, not just old industrial firms. But beneath this glittering image, thoughtful doubts were beginning to surface. As early as 2008, some journalists and analysts questioned Wirecard's numbers. There were rumors of irregularities in its balance sheets, and critics wondered if its growth was too good to be true. In the following years, the Financial Times published a series of investigative reports. These articles alleged that Wirecard was inflating profits and faking transactions, especially in its Asian subsidiaries. Wirecard always denied the accusations. Markus Braun stood firm, claiming that everything was in order. He even accused critics of market manipulation, suggesting that short sellers were spreading lies to drive down the stock price. And for a while, many people believed him. The German financial regulator BaFin even took Wirecard's side, going so far as to investigate the journalists instead of the company. It was a classic case of trust in a national champion. Wirecard had become too big, too celebrated, for many to imagine that it might all be an illusion. Still, the questions didn't go away. By 2019, pressure mounted. Auditors and journalists demanded clarity about Wirecard's finances. The company insisted that everything was fine, but independent voices kept pointing out gaps and inconsistencies. Then, in June 2020, the truth could no longer be hidden. Wirecard announced that 1.9 billion euros, money that was supposedly sitting in trustee accounts in the Philippines, simply did not exist. Imagine that. Nearly 2 billion euros gone. Not misplaced, not frozen, just not there. Within days, Wirecard filed for insolvency. Its once celebrated CEO, Markus Braun, resigned and was later arrested. Another key figure, Jan Marsalek, the company's chief operating officer, disappeared and became one of the most wanted men in Europe. To this day, his whereabouts remain uncertain, surrounded by mystery. The collapse of Wirecard sent shockwaves through Germany and beyond. Investors lost billions. Banks and funds that had trusted Wirecard were left with enormous holes in their balance sheets. For Germany, the scandal was especially painful. Wirecard had been held up as proof that the country could produce a global tech leader. Instead, it revealed weaknesses in financial oversight, regulation, and corporate governance. The fact that regulators had defended Wirecard for so long, ignoring repeated warnings, damaged trust in the system. It also led to political consequences, with debates in Parliament and calls for reform. So, what do we learn from this story? The Wirecard scandal is not just about missing billions. It is a reminder of how powerful the mix of ambition, trust, and national pride can be, and how dangerous it is when skepticism is silenced. Wirecard promised the future of finance. It looked unstoppable, admired, even glamorous. But in the end, it was just a house of cards. As we come to the end of tonight's story, let's step back and reflect. The tale of Wirecard shows us that even in our modern world of digital finance, scandals and frauds are never far away. The technology may be new, but the human patterns of greed, ambition, and deception remain the same. So, as you drift into sleep, let this story be a gentle reminder that not all that glitters is gold, that skepticism can be healthy, and that true strength lies in honesty and transparency. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me. My name is Philly, and I'll be back soon with another journey into the hidden stories of finance and history. Until then, sleep well, and good night. Hello and welcome back. My name is Philly. I love exploring history and the financial world, and here on this channel I share some of the biggest financial scandals in a calm and soothing way, so you can listen, learn, and maybe even drift off to sleep. Tonight's story is about a man whose name has become synonymous with betrayal and greed, Bernie Madoff. His scheme wasn't just a fraud. It was the largest Ponzi scheme in history, worth around $65 billion. So, get comfortable, close your eyes if you want to, and let's begin. Bernard Lawrence Madoff, born in 1938 in Queens, New York, didn't come from great wealth. In 1960, with just $5,000 saved from lifeguarding and installing sprinklers, he started his own investment firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. Madoff was ambitious, charming, and smart. He built a reputation as an innovator. He was among the first to use computers to match buyers and sellers on Wall Street. His firm became highly respected. He moved in elite circles, served as chairman of NASDAQ, and attracted wealthy clients, charities, even celebrities. To the outside world, Bernie Madoff was a financial genius and a man of trust. For decades, Madoff promised investors something almost magical: steady returns, around 10 to 12% every year, no matter what the markets did. This was irresistible. While markets went up and down, Madoff's clients seemed to enjoy perfect consistency. But behind the scenes, there was no miracle strategy. There were no brilliant stock picks, no secret formulas. Instead, it was a Ponzi scheme. He paid old investors with money from new investors. The illusion worked because Madoff carefully cultivated trust. He refused some investors to appear exclusive. He didn't send digital statements. He mailed paper ones, printed in-house. The deception was simple, but powerful. Some people grew suspicious. One man in particular, Harry Markopolos, tried to sound the alarm as early as the late 1990s. He calculated that Madoff's strategy was mathematically impossible. He warned the SEC, the U.S. financial regulator, multiple times. But regulators dismissed or ignored his reports. Madoff was too respected, too connected. His aura of credibility blinded the very institutions meant to protect investors. In 2008, the global financial crisis shook the world. Investors panicked and wanted to withdraw their money. Suddenly, Madoff couldn't keep up. On December 10, 2008, he confessed to his sons that his entire business was one big lie. The next day, they turned him in to the FBI. When agents arrived at his Manhattan apartment, Madoff simply said, "Resigned. There is no innocent explanation." The scheme collapsed overnight. Thousands of investors, from ordinary retirees to powerful institutions, discovered their life savings were gone. The total? About $65 billion in paper wealth had vanished. In 2009, Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal crimes. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison. The damage was enormous. Foundations closed, pensions disappeared, charities collapsed. Even large banks had losses in the billions. For victims, the betrayal was deeply personal. Many had trusted Madoff not only with their money, but with their futures. Efforts to recover money have continued for years. Trustees managed to claw back billions through lawsuits, but many victims never recovered what they lost. And so ends the story of Bernie Madoff, a man who rose from humble beginnings to become a symbol of greed and deception. His scheme reminded the world of a painful truth. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Thank you for listening. I'm Philly, and I share these stories to help you relax, drift off to sleep, and maybe reflect a little on history and finance along the way. If you enjoyed this bedtime finance story, consider subscribing for more tales of scandal, greed, and lessons from the financial world. Good night. Hello and welcome back. My name is Philly, and you are listening to Bedtime Finance Stories. I love history and the world of finance, and on this channel, I bring both together. Here, we explore some of the greatest financial scandals in history, told in a calm and soothing way, perfect for listening while you drift off to sleep. Tonight, we will dive into the dramatic collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008, a turning point that transformed a financial storm into a full-blown global crisis. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Lehman Brothers wasn't just any bank. It was a financial institution with roots stretching back to the mid-19th century. In 1844, a young German immigrant named Henry Lehman arrived in Montgomery, Alabama. Soon, his brothers Emanuel and Mayer joined him. They opened a small general store, trading goods like cotton. Over time, they shifted from selling products to financing farmers and merchants. This was the birth of Lehman Brothers. From cotton trading in the South, the company moved into New York banking and investment. By the early 20th century, Lehman had become a respected Wall Street firm. It financed railroads, supported the growth of industries, and even helped take companies like Sears Roebuck and Company public. For over 150 years, Lehman weathered wars, depressions, and economic cycles. It grew steadily, earning a reputation as a tough but successful investment bank. By the 2000s, Lehman Brothers was at the top of its game, employing more than 25,000 people worldwide and boasting billions in annual profits. But success often hides fragility, and Lehman's strength was built on one market in particular: real estate. At the turn of the millennium, the American housing market seemed unstoppable. Low interest rates, financial innovation, and government policies encouraged home ownership. Banks competed to issue mortgages, even to borrowers with poor credit histories. These risky loans became known as subprime mortgages. Here's where things got creative. Instead of holding on to these loans, banks bundled them into packages called mortgage-backed securities. Investors could buy slices of these bundles, earning interest as homeowners paid their mortgages. It sounded like a win-win. Home buyers got loans, banks earned fees. Investors got safe assets with attractive returns. Lehman Brothers dove headfirst into this business. They weren't just participants. They were leaders. Lehman aggressively bought mortgages, repackaged them, and sold them worldwide. As long as housing prices rose, everything looked brilliant. Lehman's revenues soared. Its stock price climbed. Executives took home massive bonuses. By 2007, Lehman was reporting record profits, over $4 billion in net income. But beneath the surface, the foundation was crumbling. To many investors, mortgage-backed securities looked rock solid. After all, people always pay their mortgages, right? And even if they don't, houses can always be sold. Adding to the illusion, credit rating agencies often gave these securities high grades, labeling them as safe investments. Pension funds, foreign banks, and even governments poured money into them. But the reality was different. Many of the mortgages inside these securities were weak. Borrowers with poor credit histories, adjustable rates, or little income documentation filled the portfolios. As long as home prices went up, no one noticed. But when housing prices began to fall in 2006, the problems became visible. Borrowers began to default. Foreclosures rose. The supposedly safe securities lost value quickly. Lehman was sitting on tens of billions of dollars of these assets. Instead of admitting the scale of the risk, Lehman tried to reassure investors. Executives insisted the company was strong. They released optimistic statements, downplayed the losses, and even used accounting tricks, known as Repo 105 transactions, to temporarily hide debt from their balance sheet. For a while, the illusion worked, but only for a while. By 2007, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Defaults on subprime mortgages soared. Other banks began reporting huge losses. Hedge funds collapsed. The credit markets grew shaky. Lehman, however, clung to the hope that housing prices would stabilize. They doubled down, holding on to massive real estate positions. But hope is not a strategy. Lehman's stock began to slide. From a peak of $86 in early 2007, shares tumbled below $20 by mid-2008. Confidence evaporated. Clients pulled their accounts. Counterparties hesitated to trade with Lehman. In finance, confidence is everything. And once it disappears, a bank can fall in days. By September 2008, Lehman's situation was desperate. Billions in losses, dwindling liquidity, and evaporating trust had pushed the bank to the edge. U.S. officials convened emergency meetings in New York. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson and Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke urged Wall Street leaders to find a solution. There was talk of a rescue, perhaps by another bank. Barclays of the UK and Bank of America showed interest, but both insisted they needed government guarantees against Lehman's toxic assets. This time, however, Washington said no. After already rescuing Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac, political pressure was fierce. Lawmakers didn't want another taxpayer-funded bailout. Over a tense weekend, negotiations dragged on, but by Sunday night, no deal was in sight. And so, on Monday, September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. With $600 billion in assets, it was the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. The news hit like an earthquake. Markets plunged. Investors panicked. Banks stopped lending to one another, terrified of hidden losses. The credit system froze. For ordinary people, the fallout was immediate and painful. Jobs vanished as businesses cut back. Retirement savings shrank as stock markets crashed. Millions lost homes to foreclosure. The Lehman collapse turned a U.S. housing downturn into a full-blown global financial crisis. In the aftermath, blame flew in every direction. Critics pointed at Lehman's leadership, especially CEO Richard Fuld, who had championed aggressive risk-taking and dismissed warnings. Others blamed regulators for failing to spot the danger. Rating agencies for blessing toxic securities with high ratings. And even investors for chasing returns without asking hard questions. Congressional hearings turned into public spectacles. Executives were grilled, but few faced serious consequences. Lehman's collapse became a symbol of Wall Street greed and systemic failure. From the ashes of Lehman came reforms. The Dodd-Frank Act, passed in 2010, aimed to tighten oversight of financial institutions, improve transparency, and reduce systemic risk. Central banks also changed how they respond to crises, determined to avoid another uncontrolled collapse. But the legacy of Lehman remains. Even today, the name evokes panic, greed, and the fragility of financial systems. It reminds us that trust, once lost, can topple even a 150-year-old institution in a matter of days. And so, the story of Lehman Brothers is one of rise and fall, ambition and hubris, growth and collapse. A bank that began as a small cotton trading business in Alabama ended as the spark for the greatest financial crisis of our time. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm Philly, and this was another Bedtime Finance story. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and join me again as we explore more of the world's greatest financial scandals. For now, close your eyes, relax, and drift into sleep. Good night. Hello and welcome back. My name is Philly, and this is Bedtime Finance Stories. I love exploring history and the world of finance, and tonight, I'll take you through one of the most dramatic economic crises of our time, the Greek debt crisis. So get comfortable, close your eyes, and let me guide you through a story of money, politics, and the struggle of an entire nation. When Greece joined the Eurozone in 2001, it seemed like a new beginning. The euro promised stability, lower interest rates, and a stronger place in Europe. For Greece, a country with a history of financial instability, this was a chance to rebuild its image. At first, things looked good. Borrowing became cheaper, investment flowed in, and the government was able to spend more. But underneath the optimism, problems were brewing. For years, Greece had been running large budget deficits. Instead of cutting spending or raising taxes, politicians often chose to borrow more money. Some of the numbers presented to the European Union were later revealed to be misleading. In fact, Greece had worked with major banks, including Goldman Sachs, to use complex financial instruments that made its debt appear smaller than it really was. This allowed Greece to join and stay in the Eurozone, but it also created a ticking time bomb. When the global financial crisis erupted in 2008, it exposed weaknesses everywhere, and Greece was no exception. Investors suddenly paid more attention to government debt, and when they looked at Greece, they didn't like what they saw. By 2009, it was revealed that Greece's budget deficit was not 6% of GDP as reported, but closer to 15%. Debt had soared to unsustainable levels. The markets panicked. Borrowing costs for Greece skyrocketed. What had been affordable before now became impossible. In 2010, Greece became the first Eurozone country to request an international bailout. The European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, together known as the Troika, stepped in. The deal was simple on paper. Greece would receive billions in emergency loans, but in exchange, it had to implement austerity measures. This meant cutting government spending, reducing pensions, raising taxes, and shrinking the public sector. For ordinary Greeks, life became extremely difficult. Shops closed. Unemployment soared, especially among young people. Families saw their incomes fall, while prices continued to rise. Protests filled the streets of Athens. Images of tear gas, strikes, and massive demonstrations circled the world. The crisis was no longer just about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about real people struggling to get by. The Greek debt crisis wasn't just about Greece. It created fears that other countries, like Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and even Italy, might also collapse under their debts. The euro itself seemed at risk. Would the currency survive if one of its members defaulted? Would Greece be forced to leave the eurozone, a so-called Grexit? For years, headlines across the globe focused on Athens and Brussels, as leaders tried to prevent the crisis from spreading. The crisis also reshaped Greek politics. New parties rose to power, promising to resist austerity. In 2015, the left-wing Syriza party, led by Alexis Tsipras, won the elections with a promise to renegotiate the bailout terms. There were tense negotiations, late-night meetings in Brussels, and moments when Greece seemed only hours away from leaving the euro. In the end, more bailouts were agreed upon, but with them came more austerity. Over the years, Greece received multiple bailout packages, totaling more than 260 billion euros, the largest rescue program in history. Slowly, the economy stabilized, but the price was enormous. By the mid-2000s, Greece had lost more than a quarter of its GDP, a collapse worse than the Great Depression in the United States. Many young Greeks left the country in search of jobs abroad. Those who stayed endured years of hardship. The Greek debt crisis taught the world many lessons. That a common currency, without common fiscal policies, is fragile. That financial tricks can delay problems, but not solve them. And that the human cost of financial crises is always greater than the numbers suggest. And so, Greece, the birthplace of democracy, became the symbol of the Eurozone's greatest challenge. It was a story of debt and discipline, of politics and people, of crisis and survival. Thank you for listening tonight. I'm Philly, and this was another Bedtime Finance story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and join me again as we explore the greatest financial scandals in history, told gently so you can drift off to sleep. Good night. Tonight, I will tell you a story that begins with pride, tradition, and centuries of reputation, and ends with collapse, humiliation, and the actions of a single man. It is the story of Barings Bank, once considered the very symbol of British finance. A bank that had survived wars, revolutions, and economic crises for more than 200 years. A bank that served kings, queens, and governments. And yet, in 1995, this proud institution was undone by one ambitious trader in Singapore. As you listen, let yourself sink into the calm rhythm of this story. The details may sound complex at first, but don't worry. We will take them slowly, step by step. This is not just about finance. It is about human ambition, trust, and the fragility of institutions that seem eternal, until they are not. Barings was not just any bank. It was founded in 1762 in London by Francis Baring. For over 2 centuries, it grew alongside the British Empire. It financed trade with America and India. It supported governments during the Napoleonic Wars. It even played a role in the financing of the Louisiana Purchase, the land deal that doubled the size of the United States. By the 19th century, Barings was called the 6th great European power, after Britain, France, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. That was the scale of its influence. Generation after generation, Barings symbolized wealth, tradition, and trust. For many, it was unthinkable that such an institution could ever fail. But time was changing. By the late 20th century, the world of finance was no longer just about long-term relationships and royal clients. It was about fast trades, complex derivatives, and global markets moving at lightning speed. Barings wanted to be part of this new world, and so it sent young traders abroad. Into this story steps Nick Leeson. Born in 1967 in a modest English family, he was not from the wealthy elite that usually filled the offices of Barings. But he was bright, determined, and eager to succeed. He began his career in finance in the back offices of banks, the places where trades are settled and recorded. Not glamorous work, but essential. In 1989, he joined Barings and soon impressed his bosses with his energy and skill. By the early 1990s, the bank gave him an extraordinary opportunity. He was sent to Singapore, to the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, or SIMEX. There, Barings saw a chance to profit from the growing Asian markets. Leeson's job was supposed to be simple: carry out arbitrage trades, buying in one market and selling in another, profiting from tiny price differences. Safe, low risk, but potentially profitable when done on a large scale. But in Singapore, Leeson was given unusual power. He was not only the head trader, but also the head of settlement. That meant he could place trades and also control how they were recorded. This lack of oversight would prove fatal. At first, Leeson seemed brilliant. He made money for Barings. His trades looked clever, exploiting tiny gaps between Singapore and Osaka futures markets. But trading is never risk-free. Losses came, and instead of admitting them, Leeson created a special account, an error account, number 88,888. At first, it was meant to hide small mistakes, but soon it became the place where he buried massive losses. When a trade went badly, he moved it into the secret account. From London, it looked like Barings Singapore was consistently profitable. Leeson was praised, promoted, and trusted. But behind the curtain, the losses were piling up, and to cover them, Leeson gambled even more. He took huge positions, betting that the markets would move in his favor. It was a dangerous spiral. Every loss created the need for an even bigger gamble to cover it. By the end of 1994, the hidden losses were already hundreds of millions of dollars. And yet, no alarm rang in London. The prestige of Barings blinded its leaders. They trusted too much, asked too few questions, and failed to separate oversight from trading. In January 1995, fate intervened. A powerful earthquake struck the Japanese city of Kobe. The shock waves rippled not only through buildings, but through financial markets. Leeson had bet heavily that the Japanese stock market would remain stable. Instead, it crashed. The losses in his secret account exploded, from hundreds of millions to over $1 billion. For weeks he tried to recover, doubling down on risky trades. But the spiral was unstoppable. By February, the truth could no longer be hidden. Barings Bank, with assets of billions, was insolvent. In just a few days, more than 2 centuries of history were destroyed. The proud old bank, which had financed kings and nations, collapsed under the weight of one man's unchecked bets. The collapse was a global shock. Barings Bank, the Queen's banker, the oldest merchant bank in Britain, was sold to the Dutch bank ING for the symbolic price of just £1. Thousands of employees, who had nothing to do with Leeson's trades, lost their jobs. In Singapore, Leeson fled, but he was soon caught in Germany and extradited. He was sentenced to prison, where he spent more than 6 years. While in jail, he was diagnosed with cancer, which he survived. He later wrote a book about his story titled Rogue Trader, which even became a film. But the damage to Barings was permanent. The bank's name, once synonymous with power and stability, became a cautionary tale. For regulators, the collapse was a lesson in risk management. No bank would again allow one person to control both trading and settlement. New systems of oversight, separation of duties, and internal controls became standard. The fall of Barings is more than just a financial scandal. It is the story of overconfidence, lack of oversight, and the dangers of unchecked ambition. It is also the story of how fragile trust can be, how centuries of reputation can crumble in a matter of weeks. For you listening tonight, it may also serve as a reminder that even institutions which seem eternal, like Barings, are still built by people. People who make mistakes, people who take risks, and sometimes people who hide the truth. And as you reflect on this story, let your mind rest. The events are long past. The lessons have been learned. And you are safe here, listening, as the tale gently fades away. Good night, and sleep well. Tonight, let us drift into a story that is less about drama on trading floors and more about quiet manipulation carried out in the background of the global economy. It is the story of the LIBOR scandal, a scandal that revealed how the very interest rate guiding the world's financial system was not as trustworthy as it seemed. For decades, LIBOR influenced the price of mortgages, student loans, credit cards, and massive corporate debts. It was the invisible heartbeat of finance, and yet, as we will see, that heartbeat was manipulated by the very banks trusted to report it honestly. To understand LIBOR, imagine a simple question. If one big bank were to borrow money from another, just for a short while, what interest rate would they pay? This rate was called the London Interbank Offered Rate, or LIBOR. Every day, leading banks in London submitted their estimates of borrowing costs. A committee collected these numbers, removed the highest and lowest, and averaged the rest. The result became the LIBOR rate for that day. It sounded simple, neutral, objective, but its reach was immense. LIBOR became the foundation for contracts worth hundreds of trillions of dollars worldwide. Mortgages in America, corporate loans in Europe, derivatives in Asia. A single adjustment of LIBOR, even by a tiny fraction, could move billions across the globe. It was invisible to most people, and yet, it touched nearly every household and business in ways they never realized. For years, the system relied on honesty. Banks were trusted to submit truthful estimates. But trust, as we know, can be fragile. Traders soon realized that by shading their submissions up or down, they could nudge LIBOR to a level that benefited their own positions. A fraction of a percent might seem tiny, but in markets measured in trillions, that fraction could mean millions in profits. During the financial crisis of 2008, some banks had an additional reason to manipulate the rate. By submitting artificially low estimates, they tried to appear healthier and more stable than they truly were. It was deception, wrapped in the routine of daily reporting. And because the system had so little oversight, this manipulation carried on quietly. For years, the truth began to surface after the crisis. Regulators, investigating the causes of the 2008 turmoil, noticed strange patterns in LIBOR submissions. Whistleblowers and internal documents revealed what had long been hidden: that traders openly requested certain submissions, that emails and chats recorded them joking about fixing the rate. In 2012, the first major revelations reached the public. Barclays, one of Britain's largest banks, admitted to manipulating LIBOR. Soon, other names followed: UBS, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, and more. The world was stunned. This was not the work of a single rogue trader, nor a single institution. It was widespread, systemic, and global. The consequences were enormous. Banks faced billions of dollars in fines. Executives resigned, and lawsuits multiplied as investors and borrowers demanded compensation for the distorted rates. But perhaps more damaging than money was the loss of trust. LIBOR had been considered the world's most reliable benchmark. If even that could be manipulated, people asked, what else might be vulnerable? For everyday people, the scandal felt distant. Few had ever heard of LIBOR, and fewer understood it. Yet, it touched their mortgages, their student loans, and their credit card rates. The invisible thread running through their financial lives had been pulled by unseen hands. In the years that followed, regulators worked to rebuild confidence. New oversight was introduced. Traders faced bans, and in some cases, prison sentences. Most importantly, LIBOR itself was set on a path toward extinction. Step by step, markets transitioned to new benchmarks. In the United States, the SOFR rate; in Europe, the ESTR; and in the UK, the SONIA rate. By 2023, LIBOR was officially retired. An era had ended. The once mighty benchmark, trusted for decades, was replaced by new systems designed to be harder to manipulate. The LIBOR scandal teaches us something subtle but profound. It shows that even numbers, seemingly neutral, objective, and precise, are shaped by human choices. And where there are human choices, there can be ambition, greed, and error. A single rate, invisible to most, shaped the cost of living for billions. For years it was quietly adjusted by those who stood to profit, until, finally, the truth came out. As you let your mind rest tonight, remember that even the strongest foundations may not be as solid as they appear. But also remember, the world learned, adapted, and moved forward. And now, this story can fade into the background of your thoughts. You can let go of the numbers, the banks, the scandals, and instead, allow yourself to drift into calm, safe rest. Good night. and sleep well.